Sarah Maffei, really great to be with you here today. I love your background. I love your mix of traditional, what I'll call traditional commercial office space, your mix of brokerage, flex, and WeWork. We're going to get into that, but would you share with our readers and listeners where you are today and what you're up to today?
Sure. I'm in a firm called Foundry Commercial. It's primarily a Sunbelt company. We're headquartered in Orlando. We've got offices across the Southeast, into Texas and California. I am part of our Atlanta and DC teams, kind of a hybrid, although I sit in New York, actually. I'm the solo one up here. But I'm able to do that because I'm focused on more of a national level than a local level. I work primarily with multi-market groups who have offices, across the country, even across the globe. And so, yeah, that's what I do.
Very cool. Very cool. So as I shared, you kind of view the world of commercial real estate through very unique lenses, having worked on the flex side, having worked on the brokerage side with just about every major brokerage there is and some boutique brokerages. So as you're leading the charge at Foundry, could you kind of just share with us what's different now for tenants, for occupiers, and why is it so challenging to make a real estate decision these days?
Yeah, it's very different. It's interesting. My background, I was in brokerage from 2007 to 2018, and then I went to WeWork, and I was at WeWork from 18 to 20, and then I got back into brokerage. So the COVID shift actually kind of happened when I was, my first stint in brokerage, and then my second stint in brokerage. And before COVID or before WeWork for me, it was a much simpler time. I mean, there's obviously always going to be complexities with commercial real estate, but back then, simple things like figuring out how much office space you need. The primary thing you needed to know was what your head count was. There'd be shifts within that, but if you were a law firm, you needed to account for X square feet per person. If you were a call center, I mean, call centers haven't changed much, but that's kind of the opposite of the law firm with how tightly they get packed in there. But for the most part, it was you just need to know your head count, and then you get a general range, and then you kind of dial it in. And companies would tended to be a little bit more stable from a footprint standpoint, unless they were in rapid growth. If they were a startup, whatever. COVID really shifted that because it changed the way everyone works. And while we were all at home working, and that continued for quite some time, a lot of people moved and created a different lifestyle that they weren't ready to give up. And that's why the last few years have shown such a shrink in demand for office space, and why there's all this vacancy out there. And companies haven't really been able to figure out until recently what works for them. And so for a long time, everyone was kind of trying to hedge their bets on what their plan was going to be for their office space. So they may know what they're going to do for the next year or two and what they're going to require of their employees, but they didn't know what was going to be happening 5 years from now. And they didn't want to be the one company who went and took all this space or paying for space, and they were never going to be able to fill it. And then, on the other side, people didn't want to not have enough space and not be able to ever get their employees back. So it's been a lot of short-term leases over the last few years, because everyone's kind of been waiting for everyone to figure it out. We've seen that shift a little bit recently, not so much that leases are getting longer, but people aren't as scared of a 3-year term, which, lease term that is. And, in 2018, a 3-year term was the absolute shortest thing you were ever going to see unless you went the flex route. And now 3-year terms are pretty common. It's actually interesting. CoStar did research, put together the numbers. And in Atlanta, for example, in 2017, let me check. 2013, excuse me. The average term length was 62 months, which is a 5-year term. Now it's 45 months. So that's more than a 25% decrease in term, which is just crazy in such a short amount of time. And then the other thing that's really shifted is the size. Everybody's going smaller because it's no longer, I need to have a desk for each person, and I need to then have enough space for those people to go have private rooms. We just really need to have collaborative space. And some people want to come into the office and be there every day and have a desk, and that looks different for each company. But most of the time, the reason people are coming into the office is to work together. So those spaces are focused more on collaborative space or desking that's together versus having everyone in their private offices, which used to be much more common.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting because we are seeing that trend of smaller space and shorter terms across the country. And we're seeing that shift exponentially, like
Yeah.
300% in some markets for increase for demand for leases that are 3 years or less and 3,000 square feet or less. The other interesting thing that I'm seeing as I'm touring buildings across the country is that the building may be 80-90% occupied, but the footfall has really fallen off. It's
Yes.
empty.
Yes.
And I'm there sometimes on a Wednesday or Thursday. So this whole misnomer that, you're getting there on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, the footfall should be, maximized is not true. So as you probably know, I'm a big proponent for flexible workspace, but co-working isn't always the answer, or flex space isn't always the answer. How do you determine when you're advising your clients as to whether to go for a traditional lease, maybe a spec suite or a traditional lease, versus flex?
Yeah. Oftentimes, at least at the beginning of the process, we'll be looking at both and kind of seeing what works. But there's a few things that we'll kind of talk through with each client, and it's pretty clear, whether you need to look at flex or not. If they're looking for under a 3-year term, you have to look at flex, like period in a story. And that's very, very common, as we were just talking about. I mean, under a 3-year term is very, very common now. If they don't want to or can't take on the risk of the build out, then there's a lot of risk that comes with build out. There's time and money and energy even and disruption to your business if you're doing it in space that you're already in, if you've got to renovate. If you need to move quickly, for two reasons. If you need to be in a month or two, you're not going to be able to negotiate a lease, and you're definitely not, well, you might be able to negotiate a lease very quickly, but you're not going to have the leverage to get a favorable lease. And you're also not going to have time to do any customization to the space. So you're going to have to find a spec suite in that situation. And then you're going to have to run really quickly on that lease. If you have a smaller head count, it's definitely something to consider, because if you have 5 people, is it really worth the time and energy to go the traditional route? Probably not. And if you add one person, that can change your needs drastically. If you have, satellite offices in a lot of different markets, a lot of times that's when you can go do, something more like an enterprise situation where, there's a lot of different co-working groups, flex groups, who have multi markets covered. And so you can work with one of them and say, hey, I need offices in these 5 locations. And you can go, boom. And then if you need to shift those people from one market to another, one building to another, there's some flexibility there that may not be there with a more traditional lease. And then also, just if you're a younger company and you're kind of, A, working on getting some stronger financials, and B, just need to be able to be more nimble, flex is the way to go, because you can't really be nimble with your office space. You can to an extent, but it's a lot easier to be more nimble and operate and adjust your occupancy if you're in the flex space.
So when I started off in this category about 25 years ago, introducing flex to brokerage, and this whole idea of flex, introducing flex to occupiers. I mean, this was all unnew and unheard of. It was deemed costly, even though we had stats to show that from a total cost of occupancy standpoint, there were many instances when flexible workspace was a better economic solution than traditional space. When you come to the table with a flex solution, how are your clients responding? Do they get it? Do you have to educate them? Is there resistance? What's the response?
Yeah, on the tenant side, the most tenants get it now. They'll have questions, as far as, okay, what's included, what's not included, what's my privacy, with my Wi-Fi, can I go put in my own Wi-Fi, or do I have to be on a shared network? What kind of privacy can I have there? But for the most part, they get flex, they understand flex, and they understand why there's typically a premium. If you look at it, you don't usually look at flex space on a per square foot basis, which is how we tend to look at, traditionally we say it's, X dollars per rentable square foot. Flex, it's per seat. It's a completely different unit. But if you did go and compare it, on a price per square foot basis, you are paying a premium for flex. But the difference is you're paying for that flexibility, and then you're paying for the services. And, 7-8 years ago, no, they didn't understand that. They're like, why am I paying more just to have the flexibility? But now that more companies have done that and people got more exposure to it, they all get it. And so, we do look and we'll say, here's what it looks like with a traditional lease, here's what it looks like with a flex space. And it's hard to compare them because there are costs that you can't necessarily quantify in a simple financial analysis. For example, legal fees. Like, you're going to have legal fees for reviewing a lease for the most part if you're being responsible with your lease.
Yeah.
You're going to hire an attorney. And so you're going to have legal fees on a lease. You're not going to have legal fees on a service agreement if you go the flex route. And so and then you don't have to pay necessarily for a receptionist. You may not have to pay for certain administrative tasks. So you are paying for those as part of your lease, but you're also not paying for those things in your operating budget elsewhere. Even things like paper and coffee, those things, they're baked in there, but you're paying for them. It's just, where is that bucket? Is it coming out of your real estate or is it coming out of your operating budget?
Well, and that's the deal. And I think that's why we've had such an uphill battle, because in the world of flex, we think of total cost of occupancy per person, right? How much is it going to cost to house that one person in that desk holistically? Furniture, the lights above you, the cafe, the shared amenities, etc. And I think that until enterprise customers look at bridge the silos between these various departments and their budgets, I think we're still going to get some friction with regards to strategically using flex as a
Interesting,
solution.
because I think a lot of our occupier clients, they actually get it more easily than even some of the real estate professionals, because whatever anybody's expertise is in, you tend to think about it like, this is what I know, this is how it's done. And yes, you're constantly trying to evolve it, but whether we like it or not, you can get a little bit of a fixed mindset about something. And this does force you to think about it differently. In the example of, we're not just looking at this as a per square foot thing. And it's not just, you're paying your rent, you're paying your building OpEx. It's looking at it of, what does it cost a tenant to occupy the space? And that's how a tenant's actually looking at it. It depends on how, they break it up on their budget as well. But that's what it is. It's the cost to operate the space. And from a real estate professional standpoint, we don't necessarily have the insight into all of our clients' full operating budget, what they're paying their administrative staff, what they're paying for supplies, all that. We don't have that information. Therefore, it's hard to make an analysis that has it totally perfectly quantified.
Yeah.
And so, we'll make our assumptions, but that's part of the reason why it's been a little slow, I think, for everyone to kind of get it and understand how to actually compare the two options effectively.
Well, and that's a perfect lead in to my next question, because well done. So workspace and facilities costs, right, represent the second largest fixed line item behind people. I mean, it's rather significant. If you get that right, that's awesome. If you get it wrong, you're pretty screwed. And so, or I should say that getting it right, I'll say it in a better way, getting it right is vital to the health of the business. And so while there is no crystal ball, how do you help your clients navigate this process efficiently? Are there certain tactics and tips or 4 things that they can walk away with to say, okay, this is how we can make this decision, more efficiently?
Yeah. I mean, the number one thing that we always want to understand with our clients is, sometimes they're very clear on, this is exactly what I need from my real estate space. But the bigger question we always have, which is covering everything, is, what is your business objective? Because that drives everything else. Do you need to find some cost savings right now? Do you need to offload space you're not using? Do you need to take on more space because you need to bring on more talent? Do you need to be somewhere where whether that's location or building, where you can attract better talent? What are you trying to do? And then we use that to then come up with solutions. It's very easy for somebody to say, hey, I need this many square feet, I need to be in this location, I can do a 5-year lease. If someone comes to me, great, wonderful. But for the most part, that's not how it's going. That's how it was pre-pandemic. Now people are looking for more guidance of, what should I be doing in this situation? So that's why we always start with the business objective. That's the number one, because your real estate, the whole reason you have real estate is to serve your business. You don't have real estate just for fun or because it's pretty. You have your real estate to serve your business. So we need to make sure it is serving your business. And there's a lot of things, what we find with our clients often is, they don't necessarily know what is possible with their real estate. They don't know if there's maybe some creative deal out there. they don't know if it's possible that they could just sublease it or if they could terminate it. We are there to be the guide to say, here's how we can answer these business objectives using your real estate. So that's number one. And then, on a more like tactical basis, if someone says, look, I know I'm going to need office space for the next 7 years, but what if things change? What if this, economic downturn, really comes in? Or what if things go really great and I outgrow my space? We can build things into a lease that help for that. We can put in, expansion options. We can put in rights of first refusal. We can put in sometimes contraction options or termination options. We can put that flexibility in there. And the reason why you may want to look at doing a longer term than you're necessarily ready to sign up for is if you can get some flexibility in there. What that usually allows is the number one reason people do this is to get a bigger TI allowance to pay for their build out. And so if you want to mitigate the risk on the cost of the build out, if you really have to do build out and you want to stretch that term to make that happen, then we would really look at, okay, we can stretch this term, but here's how we're going to make sure we can stay a little bit nimble within that term.
Yeah. So if they were, it's interesting because you talk about risk mitigation. So I think when we talked, there were about 5 points that you talked about. So you talked about term, as little exposure to CapEx as possible. And you did talk about pushing the term to get more TI, and that was, a terrific bit of advice. What about free rent? Where does that come in? And also securitization. What trends are you seeing with free rent and securitization?
Yeah, free rent, I mean, any concession package is definitely going to vary market to market. Most, I'd say, typical markets that we're seeing right now in the traditional office world, you're tending to get about a month of free rent per year of term. So if you did a 5-year term, you get 5 months of free rent. And that varies every so often, depending on where the market is, how soft it is. But generally speaking, that's a good average across the country right now. And the way that works is you'd have 5 years of free rent and then 5 years of paid rent. So it's a 5-year, 5-month term. So we call that outside the term free rent. And there's ways to be flexible with that. Sometimes, a client may say, I'd like to spread out, like if they're jumping into a higher rent building, they may say, hey, I want to kind of ease that pain of that big bump. So I can pay rent on day one, but can we maybe do half rent for 10 months instead of full 5 months off? And so there's flexibility there. And that's again why understanding your business objectives is key to everything, because knowing if you need to focus on limiting upfront costs versus you need to really focus on your ongoing occupancy costs, we can basically shape the deal based on what you need. And the two drivers for all of that are risk and cash flow. It's where can we take some risk and what does our cash flow look like? That really drives the way that the deal is structured pretty much always.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So if in closing, this is a whole bunch of really good information. We're in turbulent times, although I would say that this narrative has gone through, with regards to flex and with regards to making a commercial real estate decision. When is business not dynamic, right? So, but we are in more turbulent times, there's no question. And so three takeaways that our listeners and our readers can do if they're about to make a real estate decision. What are 3 things that they should consider, today or tomorrow as they're crafting their strategy?
Yeah. I mean, I know I already said it, but business objectives is the most important thing. Knowing, understanding truly what your organization needs of your real estate. Once you understand that, we can put together the strategy. That is the most important thing. After that, it's making sure you really communicate and have a representative that communicates with you really well. Whenever we're working with clients, we want to make sure they understand upfront what's realistic, what's possible. Sometimes they just don't even have the imagination to know what's possible. There's times we go test things and we get shocked by what we're able to achieve in the market. We just were working on a deal for relocation recently, and what we were able to get on some of these proposals was just mind blowing. You know, people were trying to buy deals to get them out of another building early. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So anyways, point being, you know, no, starting with your business objectives is the most important thing. And that can then drive, you know, how you structure the deal. I feel like a broken record saying that. I'm sorry, but that's everything.
That is everything. Yeah.
It is. It is. Number two is communicating clearly. And then number three is really kind of goes back to the same thing with the cash flow and risk limitations. Knowing where those pain points are will help structure everything. Because we can tell you what a typical deal is going to look like, but as you get further into finalizing deal terms, you know, you go back and forth a lot of times on proposals with landlords. And so, you know, you start out here asking for the world, they come back and tell you, no, you can't have any of the world. And then you kind of go back and forth a little bit and knowing where you want to dial, you know, it may be, hey, we just want the general best deal. That's fine. Or you may say, hey, we really want to make sure we get the landlord to take on the full risk of the build out and they do what's called a turnkey. That's the most important thing to us. We can pay a little more in rent. We can do a little more term. We can give up some of that abatement. That's where we need to do it. There's all those ways to structure. And so that's why really the cash flow and risk limitation is everything.
Yeah, and I can understand why you said, share with us your business objectives, and you said 3 or 4 times, but it really makes sense because for me, there has never been a function in a functional area of business or a cost center within business that is that out of sync with the rest of the business than your real estate function.
It's really interesting. Back in 2013 is when I met one of my partners that I work with now, and we worked together at Cushman and Wakefield, then at WeWork, and now, well, formerly Salesforce was our little boutique firm that he started, and now Foundry. And I remember back in 2013, he was brand new into the industry. He came from PR, but he comes from a real estate family. And I had been in the traditional real estate world doing office leasing during the last recession. And the commercial real estate world for a long time has not been very flexible. It's very rigid. It's very, this is the way it's done. Anything under a 5-year lease is crazy. And he was focused on serving startup clients because he had a lot of friends who were in that world. And we were trying to figure out how to bridge this gap between what a startup client needs when they need to get office space and what a landlord needs. And he and I would have these, sounds like a fight, but it wasn't a fight of pushing, pulling, where he'd say, well, this is what we need. I'd say, well, why is a landlord going to ever agree to that? And it's interesting how 11 years later, things really have come a lot closer. And Flex has been such a good bridge for that. And then also just the changes that we've seen recently, you know, like a lot of tenants need that smaller short-term space, so landlords are building spec suites. It's amazing how it's not that crazy of progress, but for commercial real estate, it's a lot of progress. And
it's a lot.
It's interesting now to see, you know, to think back. I can still remember sitting in the corner conference room having this conversation with him, and we was literally like, we're like, you know, and it's great to see that we have actually progressed to where you have these flexible options now.
Yeah, well, the product is finally aligning with the need.
Catching up. Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting. And next time I speak with you, I want to speak with you about how owners and landlords are adapting their product offering to meet this unique and dynamic need. I mean, I can't tell you, I visited buildings all across the country, and they are now it's old hat. You're including spec suites, meeting and event space, gyms, all these amenities with, you know, outdoor terraces, all these amenities within the building to make them more desirable and able to meet the needs of really any occupier who walks through the door. And so when we talk next, I want to talk about the evolving landscape for owners and how you're working through that.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of thoughts there.
All right, cool. Sarah, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us, and we'll look forward to the next time.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks, Andrea.